Welcome to the LSI Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Sean Slatter, and for the last 30 years, I've dedicated my life to the science of business development. I've seen the impact of our work, which has evolved into economic development and now social impact. And on this episode, I'm so excited to have a longtime friend of mine and an individual that I've worked a lot of strategy with over the year, Teresa McKnight. Teresa and I have known each other for 30 years and have done a lot of exciting things together. And Teresa, I'm so excited that you're doing this episode with me. So thank you. And to start, why don't you talk about yourself and your career for a minute?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And Sean, thank you for this opportunity. So again, Teresa McKnight, CEO of Regional Economic Development for Eastern Idaho, known as REDI. And I've been in this business for 30 years. And I think what's interesting about this, it seems like just yesterday that I started in this area, but meeting Sean Slater 30 years ago in Europe on a Utah trade mission was really exciting for me because we were able to sit on a bus as we were traveling from the various events and meetings that we had lined up for several days in a row, and being able to really discuss our passion and our value systems around economic development and social impact, and really creating opportunities for people and places and businesses. But being in this business for 30 years has really opened my eyes that when I started in this environment, it was back during my career at Utah State University when 50% of my time was research park and the other 50% was tech commercialization. And at the time that the Utah State was growing quite rapidly, it was at that time I served under 5 presidents during my 15 years there. But it was during the time that the 4th president, President Kermit Hall, came on board at Utah State that I really got my eyes open to economic development and where I wanted to take my career path. And that was in the research park arena, building innovation districts, being able to work with university researchers and entrepreneurs in creating new ideas, new technologies, new companies, high-tech jobs, high-tech companies. And so that's really where my path started in that area. And it was an exciting ride. We had a lot of successes expanding that innovation district or research park from 38 acres to 173 acres. And during that time, I was put on the board of Association of University Research Parks. Right. And I served in that capacity for 10 years, kind of the second job, so to speak. And that really opened up my eyes to research parks across the United States as well as across the world. When you see one research park, you've seen them all. Not true. Each one of them are different based on their location and the strength of the research that's happening in that area. But taking that career path, being recruited to South Dakota State University to build the first innovation district in South Dakota was extremely exciting, to create a 125-acre research park, which I was there for 5 years, then going to Montana State, redeveloping. So again, we recruited to Montana State and redeveloping a failing research park that had been in the red for a substantial number of years, getting that on the right path. And then, getting back to the state of Utah was really a pleasure and pride and joy for me to come back and work for the state of Utah in economic development. So it's just been a great career ride for me, and meeting so many people like you along the way that have the passions that I had in just making a difference.
So Teresa, let's go back to when you were at Utah State. Think about some of those discussions that we had and these ideas that really have evolved into a whole business unit and now a division of LSI. But it was some of those discussions that we had about your ideas to create a vertical market and to develop a supply chain. And I mean, those ideas we started talking about 30 years ago that have now evolved into some of these great consortia and ecosystems that LSI's built. And I feel like over the years, we've continued to stay connected wherever you've gone, and it's evolved into bigger and more exciting engagements. But I mean, talk about that time when you were saying, let's create an incubator, let's create a supply chain. That ecosystem concept at the time was so unique. Nobody was doing this. There was no geographical or vertical market or demographic area at the time. Now there's hundreds of these ecosystems around the country, around the world. But when we started talking about this, it was very new. I mean, you remember what that was like. Talk about your thoughts and some of the work that we did around early work around this concept.
Yeah, I think that the reason why you and I click so well on that trade mission is because we're both very entrepreneurial minded and spirited, right? We like to, again, make a difference and move the needle, and we like to move the needle fast, right? To really make a true impact and get people and to come together and work together. And I remember on one of our trips, I don't know if you remember, but we were both sitting there with our notebooks and our pens couldn't write fast enough when we started to brainstorm various ideas. But, I really relate this back to the early days when the Research Triangle Park was developed. Yes. Back in the early 50s, what is a research park? Nobody knew what it was, but you had business and community and government and civic leaders coming together to say, hey, we got a problem here. We're losing our textiles to overseas. We're losing businesses critical to our region, to our area overseas. And if we don't make a difference or do something now, we're going to continue to lose our young people. And that's so important, is the next generation, right, of leaders and tech entrepreneurs is so critical. And I use that example just because those individuals came together, and 50 some odd years later, the Research Triangle Park is a pure example of an innovation district and what happens when people get together. And so, when I look at my time during at Utah State University, universities were doing research.
Yep.
And, the research was extremely impactful. But for whatever reason, because we don't really understand in a university system acting as a business, we act as academic institutions rather than businesses. And I think it was really President Kermit Hall that came on board and says, you know what, we are no longer acting as an academic institution, we're acting as business. And if we can't respond to the public within 24 to 48 hours, we shouldn't even be in business. And so that really was that paradigm shift of being part of that leadership and working with him, of saying, this is exciting for me because we want to, in the innovation district, in the research park, we want to marriage public and private together, right? You've got all this great research happening at the university, but it's not being transferred out and getting into the hands of the private sector to put it to use, to make an impact to society. And so how do we do a better job of getting that out into the hands of the private sector? Where's the front door to the university? University systems are a little complicated because there's so many different divisions to the university. Nobody knew where the front door was to Utah State University. So as a research park, we acted at that, of bringing businesses in to connect them to the researcher that could help them find solutions to problems. But you're absolutely right, Sean. Those ecosystems are so critical in any arena. If you're a business, you cannot act alone in that business. Supply chain is a critical piece, right? If you don't have all those pieces of getting the supplies, the goods in to produce your product, you're sunk. If you don't have the customers, there's all those critical pieces. And I think that that's what's exciting about our opportunities of working on multiple projects together, is quickly finding solutions to those problems, because to us, it's an easy solution, right? But sometimes when you're right in the middle of the trenches, whether a university or a business, sometimes it's hard to see above the problem to find the quick solution.
Exactly. And I love that you could see this potential of our business development, the methodology that we created, and how we could apply that to these ecosystems to make them successful. And you got that early on. You understood what we were doing, and then we married that with some of the things you were doing at Utah State. What year did you leave Utah State?
So I left in 2006, was recruited away to South Dakota State University.
So 2006, this was an interesting time for us because We had been working with the state of Michigan for a few years, not long, but for a couple of years. We had started a cluster concept with the state of Oklahoma and had just then started working with the state of Utah. And I remember you called me and said, we need to talk. And I drove up there and you said, hey, I've got this great opportunity and I'm not sure what do you think? And I said, yeah, let's go do that. And so then we followed you to South Dakota. So 2006. That was really, we had probably 3 or 4 of these economic development engagements that we had started. They were small and it was sort of emerging, and then you're going off on this new adventure. Talk about that. That was an interesting time.
That really was an interesting time because I actually left Utah in the fall of 2006.
Yes.
And it was interesting because South Dakota is not well known as an entrepreneurial state. But quite frankly, there are some really exciting technologies being developed in South Dakota, in particular at South Dakota State University. It was one of their largest research and student-based universities in the state, located in Brookings, South Dakota. But, if you recall, there was something that happened in 2008 that a lot of us probably were not expecting.
Yep.
And to try to create an innovation district, a university-related research park, during a time when the economy is tanking and funds are extremely tight, not only for, for governments, state and city and county governments, it's probably not the most appropriate time to be developing an innovation district. But I got to tell you, we pulled it off. We secured a grant through the Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration. We entered into a lease agreement with the state of South Dakota to lease the property because we were a 501c3 organization. And that came together very well. We secured the federal grant. We also, at that time, there was HUD grant that helped support infrastructure. Unfortunately, that program is no longer available, which I'm grateful that program was still there. But we were able to get all of the infrastructure in the ground to the 125-acre site, roads, curb, gutter, sidewalk, and all underground utility, and then put our first building in the ground completely paid for.
Yes.
We had no debt on that. And that was a real feat. It really was. It was a true test. And it really was the first time that I had created something from the ground up. And so from the career perspective, that was really exciting for me to say, I know I can do it. But then, of course, that kind of the left shoulder, right shoulder voice speaking to you, can you really do it? It happened. And we were able to move several startup companies into our first building, which was the Innovation Center. It was so successful that EDA came to us and said, we really like what you've done. We would like to fund phase 2 of the building. So we started out 28,000 square feet. Phase 2 was adding an additional 18,000 square feet, which provided a 46,000 square foot building, which was an incubator multi-tenant building. In my career early on, I've learned that, a lot of people build incubators for startup companies, but I think that that's the wrong path to take. It's better to build an incubator in the midst of well-established companies, because those well-established companies once were incubating companies, right? And so when you have an incubator full of incubating companies, everybody's wandering the hall trying to figure out a problem, solutions to their problems. Well, that doesn't help. But if you've got well-established companies intermixed with startup companies, they are mentors to those startup companies. They've been there, they've done that. And so that actually, your success rate is higher when you create an environment like that, rather than just building a true incubator and just putting startup companies in it. I think too, Sean, and you and I have talked about this, is that, sometimes when you have the well-established company who is looking for the next new idea to their company, and then you've got the startup company that's creating their technology, sometimes creating that environment, unbeknownst to those two individuals, where you just maybe have a summer luncheon out by, the beautiful pond area that you have with the water feature, where they don't really understand what you're trying to do, but you're bringing them out for a free lunch when you're actually trying to connect them together. And so during the time that they're eating, you connect them together. And sometimes company C comes out of that, from those two individuals connecting together. So to me, you talk about the supply chain and building these ecosystems. This is where it all starts.
Absolutely. So over the next few years, you remember you told me you were going to do this adventure, and remember saying, "Yeah, that sounds incredible." By that time, we probably had a dozen engagements, and most of those engagements at the time for us were still relatively small. They were, yeah, we've got this idea around either a commodity or a technology, even. There were still a lot of the incubator farms that we got brought into, but it was mostly geographic. For us, prior to the recession, almost all of our work was geographic. And I remember these governors and legislators saying to us, we don't care just build jobs. We build tax base. That was their focus. That's what they wanted to do. Then after the recession, it changed immediately. There was limited budget. There was this huge budget deficit in most of these states and municipalities. And the conversation shifted. That, like you said, we went from having this idea we're going to build on this foundation to how do we stop the bleeding? And you remember having these conversations where I would say to you, hey, what about this? What if we started looking at some of the non-traditional vertical markets or clusters, when we started talking about clusters at the time, and then demographics, looking at how do we bring demographics, the specific demographic populations into these ecosystems. And I love that you were always you were so open to these ideas. And I mean, I can tell you some of our team was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean this is what we're going to do? And I don't know if you remember us working the veteran initiative that we were creating jobs for unemployed veterans. Our team thought we had lost it when we took that contract, and it became so successful, and it really became the model for our other demographic programs over the years. But it was always fun. You were building these microcosm in some cases of what we were looking at across the states, multiple states even, and regions, and
right.
And you were always so receptive to these crazy ideas that we talk about. I want to jump to this amazing idea that you had. Talk a little bit about your role now at REDI and the history there, and then I want to talk about this idea that you came up with around a tech corridor that is very complex and brings together a lot of these elements, the strategy and development of these ecosystems. So talk about REDI, talk about your role at REDI.
So REDI is a fairly new organization. It was actually the result of two different organizations in two different cities coming together and saying, we really need to start our communities back to back, need to start working better together. And from that, really, REDI was born in 2015. And they continue to expand that to say this really needs to be a regional concept rather than East Idaho competing against Southeast Idaho and vice versa. We really need to bring all of the cities and counties together under a regional perspective. And, they did a fantastic job of bringing those communities together. But I think that in the midst of that, the excitement of bringing all the communities together, it's really comes down to the true vision and impact, right? Which seemed to be a missing link. Who are we? And what is it that we really want to accomplish? Okay, we're going to bring all of these communities together to do regional economic development, but what is that? And what does it look like? And how is it going to impact us? Now you're asking mayors of different municipalities to come together and work together when in essence they're competing
Right.
at each other to get businesses into their communities.
Right.
But at the end of the day, our missing link was having those leaders understand that when businesses come into your community, there is no way that you can fulfill all the requirements and needs of that business. It takes the surrounding area, whether it's the workforce, whether it's supply chain that is required to keep your lines operating, to keep those services, your warehouse stocked with inventory to be able to make and produce your product or good or service. And so, understanding the dynamics of all the critical pieces and layers. And that's, Sean, I think that where you and I also connected when we were on that Utah trade mission is that we understand all those missing parts. But we also said, even though the systems were working really well, there's gaps, right? And you got to be aware of those gaps because your system can hit those areas where all of a sudden it's going well and it's going to hit a bottleneck. And so that bottleneck is the gap that you didn't identify. And so trying to stay major steps ahead to avoid any collisions and to look at those gaps, do a gap analysis, take a deep dive. Just because something is working well today does not guarantee it's going to work well tomorrow. And so being visionary and looking ahead and taking risks, thinking outside the box. When you think of some of our entrepreneurs that have done some pretty impeccable things across the United States, it's because they were visionary and they weren't afraid to take risk.
That's right.
So when you look at your position in LSI and my position as CEO of REDI, we are entrepreneurs. We've got to constantly get 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 steps ahead all the time to keep things going. But we also understand the impact of connecting people and people working together, because that to me is the most critical piece of any career that I've learned, any lessons that I've learned. It's really about you can never function as a lone island because you're going to get nowhere. And so you've got to make sure that you are working together with people. And sure, you're going to bring people around the table. And there may be times that you're not going to see eye to eye. But as long as you keep your eye on that end goal and getting that ball end goal, knowing that there's going to be obstacles as you're running the ball down the court and getting around those is the picture of success.
I love it. So like you always did over the last 30 years, you said, hey, I have got this exciting new adventure and we'd catch up and I'd tell you what we're doing and you're telling me what's going on in this new role that you've assumed. And I think early after the pandemic started, like early in 2020, you and I had a conversation. I think we had a phone call and you said, this is amazing what's going on up here and you need to come up and see this. And I remember we had this long call and I was explaining to you what we were doing around the country. And I think the two of us were taking ideas from each other. And then you said, you need to come up here. You need to come up and see this. And I finally did. And one of the things that you said to me was, and I wasn't surprised by this at all because you do this all the time. I've got this incredible idea and vision. And what do you think about this? So you came up with this idea of, what if we use this concept of building a tech corridor along I-15, this I-15 tech corridor, and using that as the catalyst for this ecosystem, a very complex ecosystem with a lot of different industries, a broad geographical area, regional area, and also looking at a lot of different types of demographics. So talk about that because that was amazing.
Well, I appreciate that, Sean. So as you know, REDI is a regional economic development organization. We cover 15 counties from the Utah-Idaho border to the Idaho-Montana border, and then over to Montpelier to the east in the Bear Lake area, and Stanley and Challis, which is the Sun Valley area. So we cover quite a wide range. Coming in and taking an inventory of this area, we have 5 federal programs. A lot of people don't understand what's going on here in Eastern Idaho. And, it brings me back to my Utah days. Utah had a lot of great things going on in Utah, but we were very humble and we didn't felt like if we tout our successes, we're bolstering, right? And that's just not a good thing. Well, it is. In the business world, it's a great thing to do, right? Tout your successes in every avenue and every possibility that you can. And so when I came to Eastern Idaho, I realized we are just not showcasing this region very well, the strengths. Having 5 federal programs, the DoD, Department of Defense, DOE, Department of Energy, Homeland Security, the United States Navy because of our naval reactor facilities, yep. And then also the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Those are 5 powerful programs to have in a region of about a little over 400,000 people in this region, right? And so, from there, we really took a deep dive and said, wow, this is so exciting. What's going on in these areas? And we took a deep dive in the sectors. Okay, let's identify the sectors that are the highest producing for Eastern Idaho. So when you talk about, creating this tech corridor, you've got to do your homework, right? You've got to take a deep dive. You've got to do your heat map and see where all the activities are occurring in your area. And we found that agriculture, advanced manufacturing, banking and finance, energy, healthcare, information technology, especially on the cybersecurity side, and outdoor products and recreation were the 7 high producing sectors for Eastern Idaho. So then when you start to map it out physically on a paper, so we wrote a strategic plan. When I first came on board, it's REDI's 2020 strategic plan. And we started looking at it. You have to stop and think about, and again, this is where you and I kind of chuckle at each other, the way our brains function and the directions sometimes that we go where people think we're a little kind of out there. But, I have to look at, when you think of the spinal cord and what it does for our bodies and how we can do things, because what it attaches to and allows our body to do. I think of the I-15 as kind of that spinal cord, right? It really is the central connector, the central nervous system, everything connecting together. And so looking at that I-15 corridor and seeing everything from the Idaho National Laboratory that's connected to the I-15 down to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, all of our agricultural food producing companies along the I-15 corridor. You think of the trucks that are running up and down. I'm saying we're missing the boat here. We've got to create an I-15 corridor. But why does it have to be, when we talk about geographics, why do we have to, all of a sudden I cross this line that says, welcome to Utah? Right. Or if you're coming from Utah, it says, welcome to Idaho. Why do we worry about these state boundaries? Why are we not partnering with our surrounding states to really showcase and collaborate together? And so, when you and I sit down and talked about creating this I-15 tech corridor in Eastern Idaho, you were all over it and said, absolutely, because you understood all of the devices and pieces that are now going to be brought to the table that probably were never considered before by companies that have been here for a long period of time.
Well, and I was excited that this opportunity, that you saw this vision. We were doing similar work in New England and the Mid-Atlantic area and the Midwest and the South. And so when you said that you had this vision for this tech corridor along I-15, it resonated with me so much because I know this area very well. And I cannot believe we have not thought about this prior to now. And then I started talking about, okay, well, here are some of the industries that we're going to bring into this: energy and defense and aerospace and the manufacturing industry, the IT and cyber industries, the agriculture, the outdoor rec. There was so much of this. Remember, we were bouncing this off of each other, and then I said, okay, and then here are some of the demographic pieces that I want to bring to the table. We talked about transitioning veterans and military spouses and TANF eligible, WIOA eligible, new grads coming out of the universities. And it just kept growing. This is what we talk about when when we refer to these ecosystems, they are very complex, and it requires funding, and it requires infrastructure, and thinking about education and transportation and housing and traditional infrastructure as well. So I love this. And we've already seen so much development. I think our teams collectively have put together a strategy to create 120,000 new jobs along narrow piece of that I-15 corridor. Mm-hmm. Imagine, expanding this into other industries and geographic areas and demographics as well.
Absolutely. And, again, we talk about filling the gap, right? So when we talk about a true tech corridor, and you talk about various open positions and looking at workforce or workers that probably wouldn't have been considered otherwise, right? How do we create opportunities? We build this ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem. It means everybody, no matter where they are in life, whether it's education-wise or financial-wise, it doesn't matter. How do we bring everybody and give them opportunity? One of the areas we're just piloting a new workforce program that we just are rolling out with Idaho Workforce Development Council. See if this pilot program will even work. But, you have a lot of open positions, but a lot of times people apply for them that maybe didn't complete high school, or for whatever, life reasons, their life path took a different direction than where they would like it to go as they progressed in life. And so, how do you provide these opportunities of saying, as an employer, are you willing to take the risk, so to speak, hire someone you probably would have never considered before, train them on the job, on the line. They're already integrating into the company. They're already integrating with the people that they're going to be working with every day. They're exposed to the equipment that they're going to be working on every day. And we've had multiple employers step up and say, absolutely, sign us out. Because, again, COVID really put a damper on everything that we were comfortable with and that we knew well. And, starting in July of 2019, and then you had COVID hit the following March, was, still new because you're less than 12 months. You're still trying to figure out the dynamics of the region and the people. It really created an opportunity for REDI and myself to say, all right, here, we've got a problem. We got to quickly pivot and adapt. And it was very difficult for some companies who've been in business for 20, 30 years doing it the same way they've always done it. But then Teresa McKnight brought up that philosophy that you've heard before, Sean, that, if we continue to do business the way we've always done business, we're going to be in the same business.
That's exactly right.
And so to me, this year, even though as detrimental and as hard as it was to have a pandemic hit us, when you look at the outcome now that we're starting to see above that dark cloud, when you look at the transformational opportunities that have happened in our region and other areas, technologies that were kind of on the back burner for companies that said, in 3 years, this will probably come to fruition. They couldn't wait 3 years to keep the doors open to their business. So new technologies that actually came out from nowhere, that developed within a matter of 3 to 6 months that would have taken 3 to 5 years, has been phenomenal. And we've seen that across our region. So when we look at that I-15 tech corridor, that really was the birth. When you talk about pandemics.
Absolutely.
When you're confined to a 10 by 10 space because you can no longer socialize face to face with people, you get creative, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it was the time that LSI and myself, we sat down, we put that white paper together and said, we got an opportunity here and let's move on it.
Teresa, we're working across the country in a lot of different vertical markets, demographics that are either standalone or a part of other ecosystems. And, this is really unique because it's incorporating a lot of different industries. We deliberately use this tech corridor because we wanted it to be broad. We wanted to incorporate a lot of vertical markets and demographics into this conduit that we're calling the I-15 Tech Corridor.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout the country, we've got a lot of engagements where we're narrowly focused around a commodity like composites or carbon technology or IT, software, cyber, energy, a lot of different manufacturing verticals that are specific, are really niche groups. Could you talk for just a minute about agriculture? Because I think that there is a lot of organizations that see agriculture as it's not sexy. There's not, I mean, really, we're going to create low wage jobs. And I think it's a myth. It really, we talked to a state recently and we had incorporated ag into the strategy, and they said, no, this is not our focus. And they wanted us to remove this ag element from the strategy. Could you just talk about ag for a minute? Because I think there's a lot of myths around ag.
You're absolutely right. You're spot on, Sean. There really is, because agriculture as we knew it. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, I had two older brothers. And so I was a tomboy growing up. And I remember, I wanted to earn money because I wanted a red 10-speed bike at the Firestone store. And I wanted my first 8-track player at the Radio Shack, right?
Oh my goodness.
The way that kind of ages me, I understand. But, my parents brought us up that, if you want something, you work for it. My parents didn't hand us things. We had to work hard for it. So I knew that I needed to earn money to buy that red, 10-speed bike or that 8-track stereo that I thought was really cool. And that the bass, you look at the systems now and the bass was nothing compared to what we have now. But, it was a cool thing. And 8-tracks were really cool at that time. So, I worked for got up early in the morning, 5:30 in the morning and moved pipe for a farmer. And when we look at where agriculture is today, everything is surrounding around artificial intelligence. It's AI, right? So we have autonomous tractors. We have different systems that actually measure the water and the soil for us rather than the farmer going out there. There's a lot of things that are so computerized, even to milking the cows, how much cream and production each one of those cows give. So our agriculture has completely changed. It is really a technology-based sector than what it was years ago, because no longer are people moving pipes. Those are large wheel lines that are being computer controlled, right? And they're measuring things as they're watering the crops. But think about agriculture. What would happen if agriculture went away? Our supermarkets would dry up.
Right.
We would no longer have food on our table. So to me, agriculture is really that stability in human life and human survival. So to take agriculture away and not focus as one of your strong sectors in your community is really probably an area that you don't want to go, because agriculture has been big in Eastern Idaho. And of course, Idaho is known as the potato plant, all right? The potato state, that's what you do. We've got barley. We're the number one producing barley state in the United States. And wheat. I mean, there are so many areas that we are strong in. And these are things that go into a lot of food products as well. And so, agriculture is extremely important to Eastern Idaho. And I think a lot of times when we think of agriculture, we think of farmers, right? To me, the biggest entrepreneur that started early on was the farmer, because entrepreneurial activities is all about taking risk, right? Absolutely. And every time that farmer goes to the store and buys their bags of seed, they come back and their entrepreneurial spirit and hat goes on, because they take every one of those seeds and put it in the ground, hoping that they'll get a crop. They'll reap the benefits of purchasing that seed. So they're taking a risk every day of planting the seed, hoping that they're going to get a crop at the end. So to me, the biggest entrepreneur that started years ago was the farmer in agriculture.
Well, and I love that it really has now incorporated aerospace and manufacturing. And you look at the UAV systems that are being utilized in agriculture, the software, the cyber, it really has changed so much. And I think it's a narrow focus for communities that have had agriculture as their economic engine to say, we're going to divest ourselves from ag. We're trying to convince these organizations that you should look at this again and embrace it. When we were first brought into Michigan, I remember the team from Michigan saying to us, we want to divest our economy out of the automotive and manufacturing industry. And we said, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. You've got so much invested in that, and the talent and the infrastructure that exists in manufacturing. You need to diversify, but that you should embrace it. And I see that with a lot of ag communities that are saying, it's low wage and it's not sexy, and we want to do other things. You may want to diversify these communities, but don't lose sight of the fact that there's a lot to ag.
But I think it's not only the food on the table, Sean. I think you bring up a really good point when you say that, because I think of several companies here that have actually taken, enzymes or various things extracted from the actual plants themselves. And I think when I was in South Dakota, the big thing at that time was the ethanol, right? So they were extracting that from the corn stalks, right? So I think that when we look at agriculture, sometimes we bypass
That's right.
that the plant itself or the potato itself has other pieces to it. So we talk about filling that gap. Look at that potato as not just something that you're going to peel, cook, and whip up into a delicious, mashed potato plate, but think about what's happening, the enzymes within that potato or the juices that come out of that potato, additional medical and other things that can be used for. So when we think of agriculture, I think that we really underestimate the other potentials of ag and the benefits of ag to our ecosystem, to our society.
I love it. Thank you for your thoughts on that, because I know you're right in the middle of it. Okay, there's a lot that we haven't covered, but I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about your economic conference at the end of October. You've got this amazing conference called The Power of Place, and could you talk about that and your objectives for that conference?
Sure, I'd love to. So we actually, when I put the strategic plan together, that was an area that I really thought we were missing, that we were not, again, telling our story well enough. And so we actually had our first inaugural conference last October. Now, we originally had it for May, but in March, this weird thing called COVID hit, right? Exactly. And so we thought, it's just, it's going to pass. So we moved it from May to October, thinking this thing called COVID would be over, underestimating what this thing really was and the impact that it was going to have. But we went ahead, and because we had moved it from May to October, we said, you know what, we're going to do it anyway. And the purpose of What's Up in Eastern Idaho, ! Not question mark, is really to showcase all of the happenings and things and companies and people that are here in this region making major impacts across the world, not just across the United States, but across the world. And so we felt like that was a time for Eastern Idaho to really shine and say, look, world, here's what's happening. Learn about it. Come and be part of it. And so this is our second year. It was, we shot for a somewhat low number of attendees. We exceeded that, almost doubled what we had expected to attend last year. And we know we're going to exceed the numbers this year. But this is our second year. And we decided to add a theme this year to What's Up in Eastern Idaho called Power of Place, because building upon the stories that were told last year, we've now really understood that understanding that we really truly are a power place. We have 6 of 9 nuclear projects that have been approved to be constructed here in Eastern Idaho. There's several other projects pending as well. But if those come on board, that's really going to expand what's going to happen in this area even more, from the workforce to the construction to the actual, once the projects are completed, the maintaining and running of those areas. The benefits to our higher education institutions is going to be phenomenal because, again, it's always, I've lived here, I want to work somewhere else because I don't have opportunities there. Our young people are understanding, man, I've got a lot of opportunities in Eastern Idaho. So we've got a lot of our young people, and a lot of states face this, not just ours. They, the brain drain of them leaving. There's so many opportunities here, and the young people are finally realizing that. But we really want to this year focus on power plays and really showcase what's happening in the energy sector. From the cybersecurity side, we've got phenomenal experts here. In fact, the governor of our state, Governor Little, has put together a cybersecurity task force. We have what's called the Cyber Core Integration Center, which is located on the Idaho National Laboratories campus. So they have the desert site between Idaho Falls and Arco, but inside the city of Idaho Falls, we have the Idaho National Laboratory campus where a lot of research is going on. And the Cyber Core Integration Center was actually constructed and developed as a public-private partnership between the state and the federal government. That is really a showcase entity where top cybersecurity officials are coming together saying, and I think the pipeline is a good example, yes, we've got to figure out a way to protect our grid system.
That's right.
And so there's a lot of thought, a lot of research that's coming out of there in protecting our infrastructure and our grid system. So when you talk about power plays, it's an epicenter here of activities. And so our conference will be showcasing, it's October 29th, begins at 9. It ends at 4 p.m. We've got back-to-back speakers talking about how do you build power plays and what are we doing now to build that power place? And then what is the outcome when the power place is built, which again, we feel like we've built it, but we've got to tout it now. What impact that has, not just to Eastern Idaho and not just to Idaho, but surrounding states and beyond. Because we want to be a good partner, we want to be a good neighbor, and we want to open our doors to anybody who wants to come in here and collaborate. We've got an incredible neighbor called Utah next door, born and raised in Utah. My heart is always there. But I think that now I'm in Idaho, I can see so many opportunities and potential for collaboration and things that we never thought could be developed, that if the two states could talk together through what we've been talking about between REDI and LSI and this I-15 tech corridor, some pretty impactful things can come out of that.
I love it. And I agree. It's so exciting to me to see this work come home for me. We've been doing this type of economic development and strategy for years now all over the country, and to see what's happening in this area of Utah, Idaho, and this I-15 tech corridor, I love it. It's really exciting. So we will put a link to the conference in the episode notes. We'll put a link to the REDI website and REDI information, and your information as well, Teresa, in the episode notes. So if anyone is interested in attending this conference, and I recommend that you do, I think it's really going to be incredible. You'll have access to that in the episode notes. This has been fun. I love catching up with you, and we're going to do some more of these because there was so much that we didn't cover. We talked about a real broad stroke of ecosystems and this one I-15 tech corridor unique ecosystem that we're building. But I've got some other things that I want to talk to you about where we can go narrow on some of these topics. So we're going to do some more of these.
I would love that. Sean, one thing that I do want to say is that our partnership, our ability of REDI and LSI to come together and partner together, I truly feel like, we are conveners together as two organizations that are working in full collaboration with one another, because our passion and our drive for bringing people together, but also we're connectors. Because not only you bring people together, you've got to link them together, right? There has to be a purpose there and an outcome. And that is why I have loved working with LSI and you over the years, because you understand that and your passion is there. So thank you for being a partner with REDI and taking risk to push boundaries with us.
Thank you. I've loved it. This has been really great. So thank you, Teresa. If anyone is interested in learning more about LSI, or if you are an economic development, a social impact executive that has a need for ecosystem development, geographic development, or demographic development, you can connect with us through the episode notes. You can connect to our team at social@lsiwins.com. Thanks again, Teresa, and I look forward to seeing you at the end of October for the Power of Place conference.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.